My name is Delia Marchetti, and I am 41 years old. When my mother's estate went into probate, I was the one who sat across from the estate attorney and answered every question calmly and correctly. I knew every account number, every policy, every deed. I had been managing her finances for 7 years. I had flown home 11 times to handle the things my brother said he was too busy to handle. And when the will was finally read, my brother received the house, the investment portfolio, and the vacation property. I received her sewing machine and a handwritten note that said she was proud of me. What I also received, and what my brother did not know about yet, was a folder I had been building for 4 years. 61 pages of documentation. Every transfer, every conversation, every signature on every document I had been asked to sign on my mother's behalf. I had kept it not because I planned to use it. I kept it because I am a forensic accountant by training, and forensic accountants do not throw away people. That folder became the most important document in my life. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. My name is Delia, and this is the channel where ordinary women stop being the quiet ones and start being the only one in the room who actually read the paperwork. If you are new here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are listening from. And stay with me, because this story takes a while to build, and then it falls very fast. Before I tell you the rest of this, I want to tell you something about filing cabinets. Most people think of them as furniture, storage, the place receipts go to die. I think of them the way a cardiologist thinks of a chart, as a living record of what actually happened, as opposed to what someone later decided happened. The difference matters more than people realize, and it matters most in families, where the story of what happened is always being quietly rewritten by the people who benefited from the original version. My mother's filing cabinet was in her hall closet, and it was chaos. Tax returns mixed with birthday cards, insurance policies 3 renewals old, a folder labeled important that contained a 1994 grocery list, and a photograph of a dog we had not owned since 1998. When I took over her finances, I spent an entire Saturday reorganizing it. I labeled everything, I created a system. She called it my fussiness. She said it with affection, mostly. Sometimes with a tone I could not quite read. I thought about that Saturday a lot during the 7 years that followed. About the fact that the moment I touched her chaos and turned it into something legible, I had made myself the keeper of the record. And keeping the record meant I was the one who would eventually know things that other people had counted on staying buried. That is not a power I sought. It is a power that belongs to whoever is willing to do the work. And in my family, I was always the one willing to do the work. Let me take you back to the beginning, which is not the will reading. The beginning is a Tuesday night in October, 7 years ago, when my phone rang at 11:42 p.m., and my brother's name appeared on the screen. My brother's name is Roman. He is 3 years older than me, 6'1", handsome in the way that gets men forgiven for things they should be held accountable for. He sold commercial real estate in Phoenix, drove a truck that cost more than my first apartment, and called our mother roughly twice a month when he needed something. I lived 40 minutes from her, in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I was a senior auditor at a mid-size firm, recently divorced, no children, a studio apartment with a very good coffee maker, and a wall of filing cabinets that my coworkers had started calling the archive. I had my systems. I had my routines. I was the kind of person other people described as extremely organized, which is code for, she makes us feel guilty for losing receipts. Roman called because Mom had fallen. Not badly. A step miscalculated in the dark, a bruised hip, nothing broken. He had gotten the hospital call first because he was still listed as emergency contact from some form she'd filled out years ago and never updated. She's fine, he said. I just thought you should know since you're closer. Can you go check on her tomorrow? I went that night. I want you to understand what Mom's house looked like when I arrived at 12:30 a.m. She had been living alone for 9 years since my father died. The kitchen had a stack of mail on the counter that went back 3 months. 2 of the cabinet hinges were broken, the doors hanging at angles. The hallway nightlight was out, which was almost certainly why she had fallen in the first place. The bathroom had a prescription bottle whose refill date had passed by 6 weeks. I sat on the edge of her bed and held her hand, and she said, "I keep meaning to ask Roman to fix the cabinet." Roman lived 1,800 miles away. He had been meaning to fix the cabinet for, by my count, about 2 years. I stayed until 3 a.m. I replaced the nightlight. I sorted the mail. I found 2 notices she hadn't opened. I made a list. I drove home at dawn. That was the beginning. Over the next 7 years, I became the person who managed my mother's life. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way you fill a filing cabinet, 1 page at a time, until one day you realize you can barely close the drawer. I took her to appointments. I managed her medications through a system I built in a spreadsheet. Dosages, refills, contraindications, her cardiologist's direct line. I handled her taxes. I reviewed her insurance policies every year at renewal. When the roof needed replacing, I got 3 quotes, negotiated the contract, and supervised the work on a Saturday, while Roman texted to say he was so glad I was on top of it. In year 2, her furnace failed in January. I drove over at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, found her in 2 sweaters and a blanket, called an HVAC company, stayed while they worked, and drove home at 1 a.m. Roman texted at midnight, "Heard about the furnace. Hope everything is okay," with an exclamation point. The exclamation point bothered me in a way I could not fully articulate. Not because it was cruel, because it was cheerful. Because a broken furnace in January for a 72-year-old woman with a heart condition is not a cheerful situation. And the appropriate response is not an exclamation point from 1,800 miles away. In year 3, she was in the hospital for 4 days with a respiratory infection. I rearranged my work schedule, took 3 afternoons of PTO, and sat with her every day. I brought her crossword puzzles and the kind of institutional crackers she liked from the cafeteria downstairs. Roman sent flowers, beautiful flowers, a big arrangement, which arrived on the day she was discharged and sat in an empty room for 20 minutes before a nurse brought them to another patient. He sent flowers for her birthday. I sent flowers and also drove 40 minutes to make sure she had food in the house and someone to eat dinner with. In year 4, her accountant retired, and I took over her taxes entirely. In year 5, her primary care physician left the practice, and I spent 3 weeks researching replacements and coordinating the transfer of records. In year 6, I helped her sort through 40 years of her and my father's belongings in the basement. 2 full Saturdays, boxes labeled, items donated, photographs scanned and saved to a drive I backed up in 3 places. Roman called during the second Saturday. We were knee-deep in 1987. He asked if I needed any help, and I said no, which was the truth, and also something I should probably examine someday. I am not telling you this to make myself a saint. I am telling you because it matters to what came next, and also because someone needs to say it plainly. The work of caring for an aging parent is not distributed equally in most families, and the person who does the work is rarely the person who ends up with the estate. That is a fact so common, it has become invisible, and I think the least I can do is make it visible. In year 3, Mom asked me to become her financial power of attorney. She was 74. Her memory was not failing, but she was practical, and she had watched enough of her friends struggle with paperwork to know she did not want that. We went together to her attorney, a quiet man named Gerald Fitch, and I signed the documents. Roman was not invited to that meeting. Not because we excluded him, because Mom called him first, and he said he was in the middle of a deal and would catch up later. He never caught up. Mom stopped waiting. That same week, I bought a new filing cabinet. Navy blue, 4 drawers. I labeled the top drawer Eleanor Marchetti, active. I labeled the second, financial. The third, medical. The fourth, correspondence. I want to be clear about what I put in those files. Everything. Every bank statement I reviewed, every insurance claim I filed, every contractor invoice I approved on her behalf, every phone call I logged. I dated everything with a small stamp in the upper right corner, the kind you buy at office supply stores for $4. Day, month, year. I was not building a case. I was doing my job. You cannot audit what you have not documented, and managing someone's life is, at its core, an audit. In year 4, Roman called during one of my visits. Mom passed me the phone. He wanted to talk about the house. The house was a 4-bedroom Craftsman in Bexley, a good neighborhood in Columbus. My parents had bought it in 1981 for $87,000. In the current market, it was worth somewhere between $620,000 and $680,000, depending on the season. I knew this because I had pulled comps 6 months earlier when Mom mentioned wanting to understand her assets. Roman said, Mom should think about downsizing. All that space on her own. We could sell, put her in something smaller, invest the difference. Mom said she would think about it.
I did not say anything because the house was her decision, and also because I had learned something important about Roman over the course of these 7 years. He did not call when the roof needed fixing. He called when there was money to discuss. I filed the call under a mental category I had not yet named, but would eventually label pattern. 2 months later, Roman flew out. First visit in 18 months. He took Mom to dinner, brought her a scarf from a boutique near his hotel, helped her with some boxes in the garage on a Sunday afternoon. When I came by Monday, she seemed lighter. She said Roman had suggested she think about a trust. Not just a will, he said, a proper trust, to avoid probate, so the family doesn't have to deal with the courts. He was not wrong about trusts. Avoiding probate is sensible. What he failed to mention was that the structure of a trust determines who controls the assets and under what conditions, and that these details matter enormously depending on who drafts the document and whose interests they are actually serving. I asked Mom which attorney Roman had suggested. A man named Prescott, he said. Roman knows him from a deal. I looked up Prescott, commercial real estate attorney, not an estate specialist. His firm did significant work for developers in the Phoenix market. I said nothing to Mom. I said nothing to Roman. I called Gerald Fitch the next morning and scheduled a meeting. Gerald was careful, the way good attorneys are careful. Not alarmed, not dismissive, just thorough. He explained that there was nothing inherently wrong with a trust, that the devil was always in the structure, that before Mom signed anything with anyone, she should have her own counsel review it. Mom agreed. She told Roman her attorney wanted to look it over first. Roman said that was fine. Of course. Whatever makes her comfortable. He flew back to Phoenix. Prescott never called Gerald. The trust conversation went quiet. I filed it. Pattern, page 2. Year 5 is the year things started moving faster. The way water moves faster as it gets closer to the edge. Mom's heart had been a concern since she was 68. Not critical, well managed, the kind of situation where the medication list is long and the follow-up schedule is precise. I tracked it the way I tracked everything. Quarterly cardiology appointments, annual echocardiogram, a blood pressure log I kept in a shared document with her GP. In March of year 5, she had a small event. Not a heart attack, the cardiologist was specific about that, but a warning. An irregularity that showed up on a monitor during a routine visit. She was admitted overnight. I stayed until midnight and was back at 7 the next morning with her medication list printed and annotated. Roman flew in 2 days later. He sat with her for 3 days, and I was glad he was there. She lit up when he was in the room in a way she did not light up for me. I had long since made my peace with that. I was the filing cabinet. He was the flowers. But on day 2, he asked me to step outside the room with him. In the hallway, under the flat hospital light, he said, I've been thinking, if something happened to Mom, are we prepared? Do we know what the plan is? I listed it for him. The will, the POA, the life insurance policies, the investment accounts, the house, the vacation property in Lakeside. I knew every number. He nodded through all of it. Then he said, I just think it should be simpler. I think we should be co-trustees of whatever she sets up. Equal. I told him I would think about it. That was a lie, and we both knew it, and that was fine. I went back to Mom's room. I sat with her while she slept, and that night I drove home and opened my filing cabinet and started a 5th section. I labeled it simply Roman.
What goes in a section you're not sure you'll ever need? You start with facts, dates of visits, the substance of conversations you decide to write down because something in your gut says, remember this one. I am trained to trust my gut when numbers look fine, but something feels wrong. 7 years of managing my mother's affairs had given me the same instinct about people. I was not building a case. I was being careful. There is a difference, and then sometimes there isn't. In year 6, I found the email. Mom had asked me to help her reorganize the documents on her computer. She was struggling with the folder structure and kept losing things. I was going through her desktop, moving files into labeled folders, when I saw a thread in her email client. I was not looking for it. I want to say that clearly. I was moving a file and the email client was open and the subject line was visible. The subject was Eleanor Estate Planning, revised terms. The sender was Prescott. I sat for a moment. Then I opened it. The thread went back 4 months. Roman had been in contact with Prescott since the previous fall, long after the trust conversation had supposedly gone quiet. The emails laid out a structure in clinical real estate language, but the structure was clear to me. The proposal was for a family trust in which Roman would serve as sole trustee. Mom's assets, the house, the vacation property, the investment portfolio, would transfer into the trust immediately upon signing. As trustee, Roman would have full discretionary authority over all assets during her lifetime, including the authority to sell, reinvest, and distribute. My name appeared once in the entire thread. In a paragraph near the end of the most recent email, Prescott wrote, regarding Delia's current POA, once the trust is executed, the POA would be superseded. No further action required on that front. No further action required. I sat at my mother's computer for a long time. I was not panicking. I was reading. There is something that happens in my body when I encounter a set of numbers that do not add up. A very specific stillness, like everything quiet so I can hear the discrepancy clearly. It happened in audits. It was happening now. I photographed every email in the thread with my phone. Then I closed the email client exactly as I had found it, finished reorganizing the desktop folders, and said nothing to my mother. I drove home. I called Gerald Fitch at 8 a.m. the next morning. Gerald's voice, when I finished reading him the emails, was the same quiet it always was. The careful quiet of a man measuring what he says before he says it. This is a document you obtained from your mother's computer while performing a task she asked you to do, he said. Yes. And you photographed it on your personal phone. Yes. Gerald was quiet for a moment. I want you to bring your mother in, not to alarm her, to have a conversation about her estate planning that is overdue. I'd like her to hear from me what these documents would actually mean for her, and I'd like her to hear it before she signs anything. Can we tell her about the emails? He thought about it. We can tell her you have concerns about a document structure you encountered while helping her with her computer. That's accurate. I scheduled the appointment. Here is the part I had not accounted for. When I sat down with Mom and Gerald 2 weeks later, I thought I understood what would happen. Gerald would explain the trust structure. Mom would be alarmed. She would understand what Roman had been planning. Instead, my mother looked at the documents Gerald laid out and said, Roman mentioned he was looking into this. He said it was simpler. Gerald walked her through it slowly. The part where she would no longer control her own assets. The part where Roman could sell the vacation property without her signature. The part where Delia's power of attorney, the 7-year legal relationship that had kept her finances running, would be nullified the moment she signed. Mom listened. She folded her hands. Then she said, Roman said it's just a formality. I had spent 7 years keeping a very specific kind of patience, the kind you need when you are watching someone make a decision about their own life that you cannot make for them, even when you can see exactly where it leads. I had exercised it at every appointment, every medication conversation, every time she said she would wait to hear what Roman thought. Gerald said, Mrs. Marchetti, I need to ask you directly. Is it your wish to give Roman sole control over all of your assets? She looked at the window for a long time. The afternoon light was very flat. He's my son, she said. I trust my son. Gerald said, You also have a daughter who has been managing your affairs for 7 years with complete fidelity. I have every document to show that. She looked at me. Something moved across her face that I recognized because I had seen it before. The calculation of a woman who loved 2 people and had always found it easier to let one of them be the difficult one. And I had always been the difficult one. Not because because I was the one who said no sometimes, and Roman never did. I won't sign anything today, she said. I want to talk to Roman. Gerald said, Of course. That is absolutely your right. We walked out together. In the parking lot, Gerald squeezed my arm briefly. Give her time, he said. She heard it. Some things have to settle. I drove home. I added 43 pages to the Roman section of my filing cabinet. Every email, Gerald's notes from the meeting, a memo I typed for myself that night, detailing the conversation, time-stamped at 11:17 p.m. Because I am a forensic accountant, and what I had just watched was a woman who had not yet understood that she was at the center of a plan, and that the plan had not accounted for the person who had been quietly documenting everything for 6 years. Mom talked to Roman. He flew out the following month. This time he did not ask me to attend the conversation. He took her to dinner at a restaurant she loved, and came back with a version of events that I learned secondhand from the neighbor she told. He had explained, apparently, that Gerald was being overly cautious, that the trust structure was standard, that he had done dozens of these in his business dealings, and they were exactly as simple as they sounded. That Delia was sometimes, he had paused here, the neighbor said, with the kind of pause that does the work before the word, overprotective. Overprotective. I sat with that word for 3 days, not because it wounded me, though it did, because I understood its function. When you want someone to dismiss the person protecting them, you do not call her dishonest. You call her excessive. You make the protection itself the problem. I added the word to my file. Overprotective. Attributed to Roman Marchetti. November, year 6. Source, Beverly Oaks, next door neighbor. Then I did something I had been putting off. I called a colleague named Frances Park. Frances had been the lead forensic accountant on 3 estate fraud cases I had consulted on in a professional capacity. She was methodical and unflappable, and had once told me that the thing people most consistently underestimated in estate situations was the documentation that already existed, hiding in plain sight in files that nobody thought to look at. I told her what I had. Everything. The 7 years of records, the emails, the proposed trust structure, the POA I held, the pattern I had been noticing since year 4. Frances was quiet, the way auditors are quiet, processing, not absent. Then she said, The question is not whether something wrong happened yet. It hasn't. The question is whether the conditions are in place for something wrong to happen, and whether you have the records to document the departure from your mother's true wishes if it does. I asked her what I thought I should do. Keep filing, she said, and have Gerald prepare a detailed ledger of your POA activities. Every decision, every account, every transaction, 7 years of it, dated and witnessed. Not because you did anything wrong, because when someone wants to discredit you, they start with the records. And if your records are unimpeachable, there is nothing to discredit. I spent the next 3 weeks compiling the ledger with Gerald. 94 pages. Every account balance I had ever managed, every bill I had paid, every investment I had reviewed, cross-referenced against bank statements and dated correspondence. Notarized, filed. I was not building a case. I was protecting a record. That is the same thing sometimes, and I had stopped pretending it wasn't. Mom died in February of year 7. I want to tell you about the 2 weeks before she died, because they are the part that nobody ever talks about in inheritance stories. The part that happens before the attorneys and the will readings and the documents. The part that is just a person and her mother in a small house in Bexley, Ohio, in February. She had declined quickly in December, The way her cardiologist had warned me was possible. Not a crisis, a gradual narrowing, the body becoming quieter. I had adjusted her medication protocol with the medical team, arranged for home health aide visits 3 times a week, converted the dining room into a bedroom so she did not have to manage the stairs. I had done all of this on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it looked like it had always been this way.
Roman flew in for 4 days in January. He was genuinely tender with her. I want to say that clearly. He sat with her and held her hand and told her old stories about when we were children, and she laughed at them with a lightness I had not heard from her in months. He helped me with the grocery run. He did not look at his phone during meals. For 4 days, he was the Roman I remembered from before adulthood put its particular pressures on him. When he left, she watched the car from the window. She said, "He means well." I said, "I know." She said, "You both do. You just mean it differently." I did not know what to do with that. I still do not. I kept it, though, in the part of me that is not a filing cabinet, but something older and less organized. The last week, I worked remotely, sitting at her dining room desk. I would hear her breathing in the next room, steady and then less steady, and I would stop whatever I was doing and go sit beside her for a while. We did not always talk. Sometimes she slept, and I sat in the chair my father used to sit in and read, or pretended to read. Sometimes she was awake and clear, and we talked about ordinary things. The neighbor's new dog, a movie she had seen in 1974, whether the plum tree in the backyard was going to come back in the spring. She died on a Tuesday morning, quietly. I was in the chair. I had been there since 5 a.m. because something in my body had known. I called Roman first. I called Gerald second. I sat for a long time before I called anyone else. I want to tell you that I did not think about the will or the documents or the filing cabinet on the day she died. I want to tell you that those things did not enter my mind at all. Mostly, that is true. But there was one moment, mid-afternoon, when I was in her study gathering the documents I would need for the death certificate and the immediate estate paperwork, and I opened the hall closet where her filing cabinet lived, the one I had organized all those years ago, and I stood looking at it for a long time. She had kept my system. The labels were still there, the tabs still in order. She had added things to the folders in her own handwriting. A birthday card here, a medical form there, a newspaper clipping about a restaurant we had gone to together the previous spring. It was her chaos, reorganized into something she could navigate. She had made it her own. I closed the closet. I finished gathering what I needed. I did not cry until I was in my car, and then I cried for a long time. For her, and for my father, and for the 36 years of my life that had her in them, and for the version of the family we might have been if things had been different, which is the grief that sits beneath the ordinary grief and is harder to name. Roman called that evening. We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation we had had in a decade. 6 weeks later, we sat in Gerald's office and he read the will. The ruling came on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk reviewing a client file when Gerald called. The lien was vacated. The court found that the agreement lacked evidence of informed, independent consent, and that the circumstances of signing, a dinner meeting without independent counsel, with a principal of the agreement present, did not satisfy the standards required for a binding encumbrance on an elderly person's property. There was also a referral. The judge had sent the Meridian Group filings to the Ohio Attorney General's office for review. I do not know what will come of that. The Attorney General's office does not send status updates to the person who precipitated the referral. I am not sure I need to know. I did what I could do. The rest belongs to people whose job it is. I want to tell you what I felt when Gerald called, because people always ask about the moment you find out you won, or however they frame it. And the honest answer is that I felt relief first, and underneath the relief, a complicated exhaustion. And underneath the exhaustion, something very quiet that I eventually identified as grief. Not grief for the situation, Grief for what the situation meant, that my brother had thought it was worth doing, that he had sat across from our mother at a dinner table in November and handed her a piece of paper and said it was housekeeping, and she had signed it, and neither of them had called me, that the Meridian Group filing existed at all, that the November dinner had been planned. I had known my brother loved our mother. I had known he found the work of caring for her inconvenient. I had known he called when there was money to discuss and sent flowers otherwise. What I had not fully known, or had known and not wanted to name, was that he had looked at the gap between what she owned and what he had and decided at some point that the gap was a problem he could solve at her expense. That is a thing you cannot unknow about a person. Even when you understand it, the desperation, the rationalization, the way people who have always gotten flowers start to believe they are entitled to them. You cannot unsee it. I filed that understanding alongside everything else. Not in the cabinet, in the part of me that decides what things mean. Then I poured the cold coffee down the drain, made a fresh cup, and went back to work. It was a will written when Roman was the golden son who called twice a month, and I was the one who had moved to Columbus instead of somewhere more interesting. It was a will written before 7 years of airport waiting rooms and medication spreadsheets and 3 a.m. cabinet repairs. Roman received the house. He received the investment portfolio, valued at $414,000. He received the vacation property in Lakeside. I received the sewing machine. I received the handwritten note. Roman sat across the conference table from me, with his hands folded, and when Gerald finished reading, he looked at me with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite guilt. Something that was trying to be both. "She loved you," he said. "She just wanted the house to stay in the family." I said nothing. Because I had read the note. "Proud of me," it said, and I believed she meant it. I believed she loved me. Love and fairness are not the same thing, and I had understood that about my family since I was old enough to notice that the flowers went to Roman and the cabinet repairs went to me. That understanding had not stopped loving her. It had just meant I kept better files. I drove home. I opened my filing cabinet. I sat down at my desk. I had 61 pages on Roman. I had 94 pages of the ledger. I had Gerald's file. I had the photographs of Prescott's emails. I had 7 years of dated, notarized documentation of every decision I had made on my mother's behalf. I had not built a case, but I had everything I would need to make one. And as I sat at my desk, I pulled the most recent item I had filed, a single sheet of paper, printed from a property records search I had run 3 days earlier. The Lakeside vacation property, the one Roman had just inherited, had a lien on it. Not from my mother, from a development company called Meridian Group, LLC. The lien had been filed 14 months ago. Let me explain what a lien means in plain language. It means someone is owed money against that property. It means the property cannot be cleanly sold or transferred until the debt is resolved. It means that before Roman had even inherited the Lakeside property, something had already been attached to it. I called Gerald that afternoon. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "Can you tell me how you found this?" Property records are public in Ohio. I pulled them as part of the estate inventory I had been maintaining. Another pause. "Delia, I want you to sit with this before we do anything. A lien filed during your mother's lifetime on a property she owned to a company connected to your brother's professional network, that is a pattern worth examining carefully." I asked him what he needed. "I need you to find out everything you can about Meridian Group, and I need you not to contact Roman until we understand what we're looking at." I called Francis. Francis, it turned out, knew about Meridian Group. Not personally, but the company had appeared in the background of a case she had consulted on the previous year. Commercial real estate. Phoenix adjacent. The kind of company that appeared in deal structures as a pass-through entity,
A name on a document whose function was not always transparent. She pulled what was publicly available. Meridian Group LLC, registered in Arizona 3 years ago. Listed agent, a law firm. No public principals, no website. Filings in Arizona, Nevada, and Ohio. Ohio filings, Frances said. Want to know when the Ohio registration was filed? When? 2 months before the lien appeared on your mother's vacation property. I sat with that. Frances said, I'm going to be direct with you. This looks like someone created a vehicle, attached it to an asset they expected to inherit, and planned to release the lien in exchange for something. Cash, a favorable sale price, a cut of a deal, once the inheritance transferred. It's a way of extracting value from an estate before the beneficiary even has possession.
Can you prove that? Not yet. But you know who can? Gerald. And the Ohio Secretary of State's office. And potentially the county prosecutor's office if this is what it looks like. I typed a memo. I dated it. I filed it. Then I poured myself a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the street for a long time. I had been the quiet one my entire life, the reliable one, the one who did not make things difficult. I had cleared the mail, managed the medications, filed the taxes, repaired the nightlights, and signed the powers of attorney. And I had received a sewing machine and a note that said she was proud of me. I had also been keeping files for 4 years that I had not known I would need. Patience is not weakness. It is timing. I went back to my desk. What happened next took 6 weeks and involved more paperwork than most people encounter in a lifetime, which suited me fine because paperwork is how I think. Gerald engaged a litigation attorney named Sylvia Okafor, who had handled estate fraud cases in Franklin County for 20 years and had the particular energy of someone who had seen every version of this story and was still interested in the details. She was in her mid-50s, compact, precise, the kind of person who read documents the way I did, all the way to the bottom of page 3, where the important things were usually buried. Sylvia pulled the Meridian Group filings. She pulled the lien documentation. She requested the underlying agreement that had authorized the lien. The request went to Roman's attorney. His attorney, not Prescott, a Columbus firm he had engaged after the estate went to probate. They responded that the lien was a private business matter, unrelated to the estate. Sylvia sent a second letter. In it, she noted that the lien had been filed against a property owned by Eleanor Marchetti during her lifetime, without, to the record's knowledge, her informed consent, and that we were requesting documentation to establish whether proper authorization existed. 2 weeks of silence, then a partial document package. Frances reviewed the financial documents overnight. She called me the next morning. The agreement authorizing the lien, she said, is signed by your mother. My chest tightened. The signature is dated 14 months ago, the same week Roman flew out to take her to dinner. The same visit where, according to your neighbor, he explained that Delia was overprotective and that the trust structure was just a formality. I said, she signed something she didn't understand. Frances said, possibly. Or someone guided her hand and she signed something she thought was different from what it was. That's what we need to establish. Gerald had the signature analyzed. He had seen Mom's signature on hundreds of documents over 7 years. He had her signature on documents from 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 18 months ago. He said, then what are you doing? I said, I'm asking questions about a lien on a property that was filed against Mom's assets during her lifetime. I think that's reasonable. He was quiet. Then, Delia, this is business. This was a deal structure I was working on that involved the lakeside property. It was complicated, but it was legal. Mom understood the basics. Mom was on 6 medications, including 2 that affected cognitive clarity at moderate doses. Did you disclose that to whoever drafted the agreement? The silence on the phone was different from the silences I had learned to read over 7 years. Longer. Heavier. The silence of someone calculating. He said, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I said, I know that an agreement was signed by a 78-year-old woman with documented cognitive considerations, without her estate attorney present.
and that it attached a lien to a property she owned in favor of a company you appear to be connected to. I know I have 7 years of documentation of her financial affairs, including her capacity and her wishes, and that none of that documentation includes any awareness of this agreement. I know what I'm talking about, Roman. I always have." He hung up.
I want to be honest about something. I sat at my desk after that phone call for a long time. Not because I was upset. I had moved past upset somewhere in year 6 when I first saw the Prescott emails, and had arrived somewhere quieter and more durable. But because I was thinking about a specific memory. When we were children, Roman and I had a ritual every Sunday morning. We would wake up before our parents and go down to the kitchen and make toast. Roman was 10, I was 7. He was not a particularly patient boy, but he was patient with toast. He would stand at the toaster and wait, and when it popped up, he would butter both pieces, meticulously, all the way to the edges, and bring one to me wherever I had settled with my book. He never had to be asked. He never made it a transaction. That boy grew into a man who flew 1,800 miles for 4-day visits when the numbers were good, and who stood in a parking lot at the county recorder's office one May morning and found out that his gamble had been sitting on a foundation that never existed. I do not know exactly when those two people became one person. I know it did not happen all at once. I know that families and money and the stories people tell themselves about what they deserve can turn a person incrementally. I know that by the time something becomes a pattern, the individual moments have stopped feeling like choices.
I know this does not excuse anything. I also know that understanding it is better than not understanding it, even when the understanding hurts. I typed a memo of the phone call. Date, time, duration, substance, tone. Filed. Then I made another call. Not to Gerald, not to Francis. To my own therapist. A woman named Judith, who has the specific quality of listening without filling the silence, which is rarer than it sounds. I told her the whole thing for the first time, start to finish. 7 years, the filing cabinet, the emails, the lien, my mother's signature on a document she thought was housekeeping. Judith was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "When you think about your mother, what do you feel?" I said, sad and grateful and sometimes angry. And then guilty about being angry, because she did the best she could with who she was. She asked, "What do you feel about Roman?" I sat with that. The toast memory was there. The exclamation point text was there. Both true. Both real. Both part of the same person. In year 3, she was in the hospital for 4 days with a respiratory infection. I rearranged my work schedule, took 3 afternoons of PTO, and sat with her every day. I brought her crossword puzzles and the kind of institutional crackers she liked from the cafeteria downstairs. Roman sent flowers, beautiful flowers, a big arrangement, which arrived on the day she was discharged and sat in an empty room for 20 minutes before a nurse brought them to another patient. He sent flowers for her birthday. I sent flowers and also drove 40 minutes to make sure she had food in the house and someone to eat dinner with. In year 4, her accountant retired, and I took over her taxes entirely. In year 5, her primary care physician left the practice, and I spent 3 weeks researching replacements and coordinating the transfer of records. In year 6, I helped her sort through 40 years of her and my father's belongings in the basement. 2 full Saturdays, boxes labeled, items donated, photographs scanned and saved to a drive I backed up in 3 places. Roman called during the second Saturday. We were knee-deep in 1987. He asked if I needed any help, and I said no, which was the truth, and also something I should probably examine someday. I called Gerald that afternoon. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "Can you tell me how you found this?" Property records are public in Ohio. I pulled them as part of the estate inventory I had been maintaining. Another pause. "Delia, I want you to sit with this before we do anything. A lien filed during your mother's lifetime on a property she owned to a company connected to your brother's professional network, that is a pattern worth examining carefully." I asked him what he needed.
I need you to find out everything you can about Meridian Group, and I need you not to contact Roman until we understand what we're looking at. I called Frances. Frances, it turned out, knew about Meridian Group. Not personally, but the company had appeared in the background of a case she had consulted on the previous year. Commercial real estate. Phoenix adjacent.
I said, I feel like I want him to understand what he actually did. Not to punish him. I just want him to understand it fully, without justifications. I want to know if he is capable of that. Judith said, what if he isn't? I said, then I will know that too, and I will file it accordingly. She almost laughed. I did laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in several weeks, and it felt like something loosening. I want to tell you about the night I almost stopped. It was a Thursday in December, 2 months after the probate petition was filed. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a folder of Frances's preliminary findings open in front of me. The Meridian Group documentation was spread across the table. Entity filings, the lien instrument, the correspondence Frances had been able to pull through public records. Neat, organized, damning in the way that documentary evidence is damning. Quietly, without drama, just by being what it is. My phone was face up on the table. I was waiting for a call from Sylvia, who had said she would reach out with an update on the motion schedule. Instead, I got a text from Roman. He said, I just want you to know that I loved Mom too. I know you think I didn't do enough. I know you're angry. But she was my mother. And what you're doing right now is going to hurt a lot of people. And I don't think she would have wanted that. I put the phone down. Here is what I want to tell you about that text, because I have thought about it many times in the months since, and I think it deserves to be examined carefully. Roman was not wrong that I was angry. He was not wrong that the process was going to be difficult. He was not wrong, I think, that our mother would have found the whole thing painful. But there was a logic buried in the text that was designed to sound like love and actually functioned as a threat. The logic was, because you love the same person I claim to love, you should back down. Because the process is hard, you should stop the process. Because she would not have wanted this conflict, you should absorb the cost of the conflict by withdrawing. It is an elegant trap, and I have seen versions of it everywhere. In families, in workplaces, in every situation where someone is benefiting from an unfair arrangement and needs the person who noticed to stop noticing. It works by making the person who objects responsible for the consequences of the objection, rather than holding the person who created the original problem responsible for the consequences of the problem. She would not have wanted this. Maybe. I believed that. I also believed she would not have wanted her signature on a document she thought was housekeeping. I believed she would not have wanted an Ohio company she had never heard of attached to the last property she ever owned. I believed she would not have wanted to die not knowing what she had signed. Which of those truths wins? You cannot ask her. She is gone. And the person asking me to stop is the person who benefited from her not knowing. I typed back one sentence. I know you loved her. I'm going to finish this. Then I picked up the tea, poured it out, made a fresh cup, and went back to the folder. That is not the ending. The ending in stories like this is never one moment of resolve. It is 100 small moments of choosing not to stop, choosing to show up for the next filing deadline, the next deposition, the next morning when your brother's voice is in your head saying she would not have wanted this, and you have to answer it for yourself, again, with the same answer. That is the work. Not the courtroom, not the ruling. The 1,000 ordinary Tuesday evenings when you could have closed the folder and walked away, and nobody would have blamed you. I did not close the folder. I kept filing. That is all. Sylvia called at 9 p.m. The motion schedule had been confirmed. We were on track. I went to bed. I slept the sleep of a woman who has decided something difficult and is no longer deciding it, which is its own kind of peace. Not to contest the will. The will was the will,
and my mother had written it of her own free will 9 years ago. The petition concerned the lien, whether the agreement that had created it had been entered into with full, informed, uncoerced consent by a person whose documented medical history raised legitimate questions about her capacity and vulnerability. Roman hired 2 attorneys. I counted the filings. Frances was deposed for 4 hours. She walked through the Meridian Group structure with the calm of someone presenting quarterly results. She used words like manufactured obligation and beneficial interest, and the attorneys on the other side took careful notes. I was deposed for 6 hours. I brought my filing cabinet. Not the cabinet itself, the contents. Organized by tab, cross-referenced, indexed on a cover page I had typed in 10-point font because I wanted every item to be findable without drama.
94 pages of ledger, 61 pages on the Roman section, Gerald's correspondence file, Frances's analysis, the document examiner's report. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit in that room. Depositions happen in conference rooms that look like every other conference room. A long table, water pitchers, fluorescent light filtered through frosted glass. There were 4 attorneys, a court reporter, and me. I had my binder on the table. I had a legal pad I did not write on because I did not need to. Roman's lead attorney was in his late 40s, methodical. The kind of man who had conducted enough depositions to have a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. He started with the basics. My relationship to my mother, the POA, the scope of the authority I had exercised. He moved through my professional background. He spent 40 minutes on the ledger, page by page, asking me to explain individual entries. I explained every one. I had lived every one. The entries were mine. Then he shifted. He asked whether I had ever felt that my role in my mother's life was underappreciated, whether I had ever expressed frustration about the distribution of caregiving responsibilities, whether I had ever, in any written communication, suggested that I deserved more recognition for my contributions. I said, I am sure I have had feelings about those things. I did not document them, so I cannot speak to them precisely. He said, why didn't you document them? I said, because feelings aren't auditable. I documented facts. He looked at me for a moment. Then he tried another approach. He asked whether my documentation practices were, as he put it, typical for a person in a caregiving role. I said, I'm a forensic accountant. My documentation practices are typical for me. He said, do you think it's possible that your documentation of your brother's behavior was motivated by a desire to position yourself advantageously in a potential dispute? I said, I documented my brother's behavior when it appeared to intersect with my mother's finances in ways that raised questions. That is what forensic accountants do when they notice anomalies. The motivation is accuracy, not advantage, although in this case they turn out to produce the same result. He closed the binder. Roman's attorney looked at the volume of material and said, you've been documenting this for some time. I said, I've been managing my mother's affairs for 7 years. Documentation is how you manage. He said, did you anticipate litigation? I said, I anticipated accountability. Those are different things. He flipped through the ledger. All of this has been notarized? Yes. And the emails from the Prescott correspondence? How did you come to have those? My mother asked me to organize her computer files. The email client was open. I was not searching for them. I photographed them because I recognized their significance. The act of photographing documents visible on a screen you have been given authorized access to is not a legal violation. You may verify that with your colleagues. He closed the binder. The hearing was in May. I want to be accurate about what the hearing was and was not. It was not a dramatic courtroom moment with a gallery of witnesses and a single piece of paper that changed everything. Estate matters in probate court are procedural and unglamorous. There are filing deadlines and motion schedules, and a judge who has seen every version of this before and has the patience of someone who has. But there was a moment. Roman testified. He was polished. He had always been polished. He explained the Meridian Group in careful language, a business structure, a deal arrangement, something that would ultimately have benefited the family estate.
He said Mom had understood what she was signing. He said she had been sharp until the end. He said the lien was a legitimate business instrument, and that Delia's petition was an attempt to relitigate a will she had not benefited from. The judge asked his attorney, "What documentation exists showing Mrs. Marchetti's informed understanding of this agreement?" The attorney produced the signed document. The judge reviewed it. Then she said, "Is there documentation of any independent counsel advising Mrs. Marchetti before signing?" "No," the attorney said. "Is there documentation that her estate attorney, Gerald Fitch, was informed of or participated in this transaction?" "No." "Is there medical documentation establishing that Mrs. Marchetti's cognitive capacity was assessed at or near the time of signing?" "No." The judge set the document down. She turned to Sylvia. Sylvia had 3 things: the document examiner's report, Francis Park's analysis of Meridian Group's structure and filing timeline, and Gerald Fitch's ledger, the 94 pages of 7 years of my work on my mother's behalf, which established unambiguously that Eleanor Marchetti's financial affairs had been managed with precision, that her wishes had been carefully documented, and that the agreement in question appeared nowhere in any of those records. Sylvia also had one more thing: an affidavit from Beverly Oaks, the next-door neighbor. Beverly, who had known my mother for 22 years, who had been there for the dinner Roman had taken her to in November, who had sat with Mom the morning after and listened to her describe the evening. In the affidavit, Beverly stated that Eleanor had described signing a paper at dinner, that she had believed it was related to updating her address for a financial account, that Roman had said it was just housekeeping, and that she had asked Beverly the next morning whether she thought she should mention it to Delia. Beverly's affidavit ended. Eleanor said she did not want to make things complicated for Roman. She said that about a lot of things, but she looked worried when she said it. Eleanor did not look worried easily. The judge did not rule immediately. Judges rarely do. But she ordered the lien suspended pending her ruling, and she directed Roman's attorneys to provide full documentation of Meridian Group's principles within 14 days. We walked out into the courthouse hallway. Sylvia said nothing for a moment. Then, "The documentation you brought, the indexing, the cross-references, the notarization, that is not something most people do." I said, "I am a forensic accountant." She said, "I know. I'm saying the judge noticed." "Omen called that afternoon," I answered. He said, "I didn't mean for any of this to hurt you." I said, "I know." He said, "The Meridian deal was real. It wasn't a scam. It was a bad structure and it went wrong and I panicked. I should have told you. I should have told her." I said, "Yes." He said, "She loved you, Delia. She just didn't know how to say it in a way you could hear." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the sewing machine, which I had not plugged in yet, and the note that said she was proud of me, which I had read 6 times and kept in the top drawer of my filing cabinet, behind the tab labeled hers. I said, "I know she loved me. I never doubted that. I doubted whether she knew what was happening to her finances in the last year of her life. Now I know she didn't, and I made sure there's a record of that." He said, "What happens now?" I said, "The Attorney General's office will do what it does. That's not my decision anymore. And the estate proceeds according to the will, which is what she wrote and what she meant. That's her decision." A long pause. Then, "You're not going to fight the will?" "I never was," I said. "The will is what she wanted. I just wasn't going to let something be attached to it that she didn't know about and didn't choose." He was quiet. I said, "Roman, I took care of her for 7 years. I sat in every waiting room. I managed every account. I filed every form. I did it because I loved her, not because I expected anything from it. If I had expected something from it, I would have told her that. I didn't, because that wasn't the point." He said, "I know." I said, "Then maybe that's enough." We hung up. I do not know what happens next between Roman and me. I think we will probably find some version of a relationship, slow and careful, built on a truth we have both now seen clearly. Or we will not. I have stopped making predictions about family.
The vacation property in Lakeside, once the lien was cleared, transferred cleanly to Roman, per the will. He has not sold it. I do not know if he will. The sewing machine is in my living room. It is a 1987 model, a good one, the kind that will run another 40 years if you oil it. My mother had made curtains on it, a tablecloth I grew up eating dinner on, 2 quilts that are somewhere in the house she used to live in. I have not yet turned it on. I have been thinking about what I want to make first. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with inheriting an object instead of a property. People assume it is about the money. It is not, or at least not entirely. It is about recognition. My mother used that sewing machine every winter. It was on the table in the room off the kitchen for 30 years. She made things that lasted, and she left it to me because I think she knew I was the kind of person who would take care of it, who would oil it and thread it and use it until it wore out. Whereas Roman would have put it in a storage unit and sold the storage unit.
That is both a compliment and an indictment. And it took me 3 months to understand that it could be both at the same time. The note is in the top drawer, behind the tab labeled hers. I read it sometimes. I believe it. That is the thing about love and fairness. They can both be true at once, and neither one cancels the other. My mother loved me. My mother also found it easier to leave the house to Roman, and she did not examine why carefully enough to understand that easier and right are not synonyms. She was 78 and tired, and had spent her whole life letting the golden child be golden. I do not think she was malicious. I think she was habitual. And I have made my peace with that, slowly, in the way you make peace with things that are simultaneously understandable and genuinely unfair. Gerald retired in June. He sent me a card. He said in it that in 34 years of estate law, he had rarely encountered a client whose documentation was as thorough, and that if more people managed their loved ones' affairs the way I had, he would have seen considerably less grief in his conference room. It was the nicest thing anyone said to me in the entire 2 years this took. Francis and I are collaborating on a continuing education paper about documentation practices in POA situations. It turns out there is a meaningful gap in guidance for people serving as financial agents for aging parents, and we would like to help close it. It is the most Delia Marchetti thing I have ever done, and I am not sorry about that. What I want to say before I close the filing cabinet is this. There is a particular kind of person in every family. She is the one who knows where the documents are. She's the one who renews the insurance before it lapses and calls the contractor and sits in the hospital with a printed medication list and a phone charger because she remembered that the last time nobody remembered the phone charger. She is the one who is described as reliable and capable and extremely organized. And she is not thanked for any of it in the will. She's me. She might be you. And if she is you, I want you to hear the thing nobody told me until I figured it out myself. The work is not invisible if you document it. The receipts exist if you keep them. The record cannot be revised if you have notarized copies. You do not have to be louder or more demanding or more willing to fight in the open. You just have to be more thorough than the people who are betting that you won't be. Keep the records. Date everything. Cross-reference what can be cross-referenced. Not because you expect a fight, because records are what you have when someone tells a different story about what happened. And someone always tells a different story about what happened when there is money involved. And know this, there is a version of your life in which you do all the work and receive the sewing machine and the note that says she was proud of you. And that version is real, and it hurts, and you are allowed to grieve it. And in that same version, you can also be the person who made sure her mother's last year was not stolen from her, that what was hers was protected, that the lien came off the property and the record was clean. You cannot always choose what you receive. You can always choose what you protect. The filing cabinet is still in my home office. 4 drawers. I have not cleaned it out.
I think I will add a fifth section. Something for whatever comes next. For whatever the work turns into when it is not caregiving anymore, but something more deliberate. A paper, a practice, a guide for the people who are keeping their mother's medication spreadsheet at this very moment and wondering whether anyone will ever say thank you.
I will say it. Thank you. You are not invisible. You are the record. That is my story. 7 years, 1 filing cabinet, 61 pages in a Roman section I hoped I would never need, and a lien vacated on a Thursday morning while my coffee went cold. If this is the kind of story that sits with you, if you are the one in your family who keeps the records while someone else gets the flowers, drop a comment. Tell me where you are and what you are managing, and whether anyone has said thank you lately. I think there are more of us than anyone admits. And if someone in your life needs to hear that being the careful one is not the same as being the invisible one, share this with them. It might be the most useful thing you do for them today. Hit subscribe if you are new here. I will see you in the next one. And if you are sitting somewhere right now with a filing cabinet and a cold cup of coffee and a family situation that nobody else seems to be paying close enough attention to, keep going. The record you are building is the most important thing in the room, even when it does not feel like it, especially when it does not feel like it.